2,000 years ago in the wilderness, a voice was heard crying, "Make way for the coming Messiah, who is Jesus." We know lots about Jesus' ministry through the New Testament, but we know very little about his earlier life. Who taught Jesus and who taught John the Baptist? Where are the missing years? Many scholars have concluded quite possibly that John the Baptist was an Essene, but Jesus' origin and whereabouts is unknown. During the time of Jesus and John the Baptist, recognized Roman authors and respected ones wrote about the Essenes who were living in Palestine and Judea at that time. This video is going to look back in detail what those Roman authors said about the Essenes and then compare directly what was said about Jesus Christ, his teachings, and the early Christians. At the point of congruence, we will contrast and include what was said exactly about Jesus Christ in the New Testament.
From the remote ages of antiquity, a remarkable teaching has existed that is universal in its application and ageless in its wisdom. Fragments of it are found in the Samaritan hieroglyphics and on tiles and stone dating back some 8,000-10,000 years. Some of the symbols, some is for the sun, moon, air, water, and other natural forces, are from an even earlier age preceding the cataclysm that ended the Pliocene period. Just how many thousands of years previous to that this teaching has existed is unknown. To study and practice this teaching is to reawaken within the heart of every man an intuitive knowledge that can solve his individual problems and the problems of the world. Traces of this teaching have appeared in almost every religion. Its fundamental principles were taught in ancient Persia and Egypt, India, Tibet and China, Palestine, Greece, and many other countries. But it has been transmitted in its most pure form by the Essenes, that mysterious brotherhood, which lived during the last 2 or 3 centuries BC and the 1st century of the Christian era in the Dead Sea in Palestine and Lake Marotus in Egypt. It's in Palestine and Syria the members of the brotherhood were known as the Essenes, and in Egypt, therapeutai were healers. The origin of the brotherhood is said to be unknown, and the derivation of its name is uncertain. Some believe it comes from Enoch and claim him to be their founder, their communion with the angelic world having been first given to him. But whatever their origin, it is certain the Essenes existed for a very long time as a brotherhood, perhaps under other names in other lands. The teaching appears in the teachings of the Zoroaster, who translated it into a way of life that was followed for thousands of years. It contains the fundamental concepts of Brahmanism. The systems of India sprang from this same source. Buddha later gave forth essentially the same basic ideas, and his sacred Bodhi tree correlated with the Essene tree of life. Ancient Greece also followed these principles and the way of life. The same teaching was an element of the Adamic culture of the Phoenicians, the Alexandrian school of philosophy in Egypt, and contributed greatly to many branches of Western culture, Freemasonry, Gnosticism, the Kabbalah, and Christianity. Jesus interpreted them with the 7 Beatitudes of the Sermon on the Mount. The Essenes lived on the shores of the lakes and rivers away from cities and towns, practiced a communal way of life, sharing equally in everything. They were mainly agriculturists and arboriculturists, having a vast knowledge of crops, soil, and climate conditions, which enabled them to grow a great variety of fruits, vegetables, and in comparatively desert areas with a minimum amount of labor. They had no servants or slaves, and they were said to have been the first people who condemned slavery, both in theory and in practice. There were no rich, and there were no poor amongst them, both conditions being considered by them as deviations from the natural laws. They established their own economic system, based wholly on the natural laws, and showed all man's foods and material needs can be attained without struggle through knowledge of those laws, those that are written upon your heart. They spent much time and study both of ancient writings and their special branches of learning such as education, healing, and astronomy. They were said to be heirs of Chaldean and Persian astronomy and Egyptian arts of healing. They were adept in prophecy, for which they were prepared by long fasting, and in the use of plants and herbs for healing. Man and beast, they were likewise proficient. They lived a simple, regular life, rising each day before sunrise to study and commune with the forces of nature, bathing in cold water as a ritual, and donning white garments. After their daily labor in the fields and vineyards, they partook of their meals in silence, proceeding and ending it with prayer. They were entirely vegetarian, and in their eating never touched flesh foods or fermented liquids. Their evenings were devoted to study and communion with the heavenly forces. Evening was the beginning of their day. Their Sabbath or holy day began on Friday evening, the first day of their week. This day was given to study, discussion, and entertaining of visitors and playing certain musical instruments. Their way of life enabled them to live to advanced ages of 120 years or more, and they were said to have marvelous strength and endurance. In all their activities, they expressed creative love. They sent out healers and teachers from the brotherhoods, amongst whom were Elijah, John the Baptist, John the Beloved, and the great Essenian master, Jesus. Membership in the brotherhood was attainable only after a probationary period of a year and 3 years of initiational work, followed by 7 more years before being given the full inner teaching. The outer teachings are preserved in Aramaic text in the Vatican in Rome. Some of the Slavic text was found in the possession of the Habsburgs in Austria, and said to have been brought out of Asia in the 13th century by priests fleeing the hordes of Genghis Khan. Echoes of the teaching exist today in many forms, in rituals of the Masons, in the 7-branch candlestick, in the greetings, peace be with you, used time of Moses. From its antiquity, its persistence through the ages, is evident the teachings could not have been the concept of any individual or any people, but it is the interpretation by a succession of great teachers of the law of the universe, the basic law, eternal and unchanging as the stars are in their course, same now as 2 or 10,000 years ago, and as applicable today as then. Teaching explains the law and shows how man's deviations from it are the cause of all his troubles, and gives the method by which he can find his way out of his dilemma. The Essenian teachings, gospel of peace.
In the summer of 1947, a Bedouin shepherd lad who had lost one of his goats climbed up a cliff overlooking the Dead Sea and stumbled into a cave full of ancient scrolls. These were the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, the library of a religious community that lived there some 2,000 years earlier. Many scholars identify them as a sect known as the Essenes.
Unearthed among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the War Scrolls offers a glimpse into the beliefs of a Jewish sect, likely the Essenes. It details an epic war between the sons of light, representing the righteousness, and the sons of darkness, symbolizing evil. The ultimate goal of the war, according to the scroll, is to enable the sons of light to retake Jerusalem and restore the temple's rightful liturgy and devotion to God. The war scroll doesn't delve into the physical details of the temple itself, but it highlights the centrality of this sacred space in their way of thinking and their end-time beliefs. Regaining control of Jerusalem and restoring the temple service seems to be the key to ushering a new era for this sect. Now let's compare these writings found in the Dead Sea Scrolls to the actions of Jesus. His ministry in Judea was a whirlwind of controversy, often placing him at odds with the two most powerful religious groups, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. These factions, despite their differences, found common ground in their opposition to Jesus' teaching and growing popularity. The Sadducees, a wealthy elite class collaborating with the Roman authorities, saw Jesus as a potential rabble-rouser. They rejected his pronouncements of an afterlife and the resurrection of the dead, fearing his message could incite social unrest. They tried to trap him with tricky theological questions, hoping to discredit him in the eyes of the people. The Pharisees, on the other hand, were religious scholars known for their strict adherence to Jewish law and traditions. Jesus challenged their authority by questioning their interpretations of Scripture and criticizing their focus on outward rituals over genuine faith. The Pharisees saw Jesus as a threat to their power and influence, constantly trying to find ways to discredit him or even have him arrested. Near the end of his ministry, while entering Jerusalem for Passover, Jesus encountered a scene that enraged him, where he committed his only act of violence recorded in the New Testament. The temple courts, meant for prayer and reflection, had become a bustling marketplace. Money changers offered inflated exchange rates for pilgrims, and merchants sold animals for sacrifice at exorbitant prices also. Jesus, fuming at the commercialization of a sacred space, took a forceful stance. He fashioned a whip and drove out the merchants and money changers, overturning their tables and scattering their coins. This act of defiance, known as the cleansing of the temple, serves as a powerful symbol of Jesus' condemnation of hypocrisy and his call for a return to the temple's core purpose, a house of prayer for all nations. Very similar in objective as the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls suggest. So we can now see that both the Qumran community and Jesus were in the same war against those that controlled and violated the temple, meant to be God's house of worship. Could Jesus then be actually part of the movement of the Essenes and the Qumran community?
Cephas, after a 3-year apprenticeship with him, described their teachings. The doctrine of the Essenes tends to teach all men that they confidently may trust their fate in the hands of God. Nothing happens without his will. They say that the soul is immortal, and they aspire to lead a righteous and honest life. They are the most honest people in the world, and always good is their word. Very industrious and enterprising, and show great skill and concern in agriculture. On account of a sense of justice, they never keep servants. They do not think it's right that one should be a slave or a servant of the other, as well as all men and brethren, and God is their Father. They also perform the service of priests for all the wants, such as food and clothing. They all live the same simple, industrious, and frugal life. The third class of philosophers among the Jews, and that class is most esteemed for their just and moral life, and that is the Essenes. They do not live in any particular town, but in every town the order has its respective house. In every town is an elder. The Essenes' worship of God is grand, sacred, and majestic. They eat and drink only what is necessary for their wants. In general, they do not act without the knowledge and consent of their elders, but it is always left to their own free will to exercise benevolence and compassion to all in want. Of all the classes of society, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, to comfort the sick, to visit and assist and comfort the prisoner, to comfort, to aid, and to protect the widows and the fatherless. They study with perseverance and interest ancient writings. They have profound knowledge of the art of healing, and they study it arduously.